Hello and welcome to week 3 in our journey through adult development, and we are going to be spending some time looking at transitions into adulthood. Mainly kind of like talking about the traditions and whatnot of what happened in our lives along the way that indicated that we were transitioning into adulthood when we went from childhood or adolescence into adulthood. And then examining, well, what does it mean to be an adult? And I have hopefully I've worked out the right way to do this, an assignment where I pair you off, and we're going to be looking at how we conceive adulthood. What is it? What does it mean that we're adult? And essentially evaluating to what degree am I right now fulfilling that job description that I call adulthood. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Look at Brightspace. We'll see that I've made some changes to some of the material here simply because I'm developing the class as I go and buying myself some time here. I took Emerging Adulthood that was in week 3 and I put that into week 4, and I also moved the Personal Adjustment, Adult Adjustment Special Assignment into week 6. So that's going to be a little later in the course, and I'll get to designing that very quickly here. So for this week, we only have one chapter, Transitions into Adulthood, Chapter 3 quiz, and Chapter 3. Chapter 3, not quiz, it's a discussion. Sorry, I miswrote that, and I will repair that. It'll be different by the time you see this video. So if we look at Chapter 3, we see here the link to the chapter itself, the PDF, and then there's the discussion right there. So let's take a look at our content here. Transitions into Adulthood, Chapter 3. And I start off by geeking out on you a little bit here. In Star Trek 3, Search for Spock, Spock goes through adolescence and goes through his Pon farr, which is a rite of passage involving biological changes and whatnot. And Spock has been regenerated by the Genesis Project and comes back to life. And the movie portrays him kind of going a little nuts a little bit and transitioning into adulthood. Now, by way of being clear that in the canonical, meaning the official story of the Star Trek universe, Pon farr happens every 7 years. But in this particular version of the story, it was very clear that Spock was going from adolescence into adulthood. And so just an interesting way in which, in this particular fantasy universe, how adulthood sort of comes around. So what we're looking at when we look at these events in our lives or traditions, we're talking about rites of passage. The rites of passage is a focus of research in cultural anthropology, and these are found all over the world in nearly every culture. Now, some cultures have a very distinct sort of event, and I feature some of those. Some of those are featured in the video that I have there, but you can just look up rites of passage videos, and you can see across the world all kinds of things. And certainly we have them, but in some countries, these are very precise delineations. They're events where yesterday you were a child, today you're an adult, with all the expectations and glories that go with that. In Western world, sort of the focus of the video that I have in there, in the Western world, we lack this sort of clearly defined aspect of entering into adulthood. It's not a cultural universe. It's a cultural universal in terms of a practice, but we don't have like this big one event. We have all kinds of events that happen in our lives that may signify our personal entry into adulthood. The video features a man who took it upon himself to create a highly structured, long-term transition for his child to transition into adulthood that included rituals, the use of community, lessons that should be taught, values, norms, and expectations passed on to the next generation in preparation for the role of adulthood. and then particular challenges associated with that. And so kind of gets into some details about this particular person's efforts to make that a more significant event that, more clearly delineated. Now, the confusion as to when we become adults, I try to explore that in the course book here by telling you about my own personal experiences as an example. The things that happen in my life. I gave you a lot. No, I didn't give you all of them, but I gave you a lot of them about the things that happened in my life that were related to rites of passage, or were officially rites of passage, and what did they mean to me in terms of my transition into adulthood, which really actually through all of these doesn't occur until the end. But it highlights the I won't say it's a confusing image because I didn't feel confused, but I certainly have no memory of like the day I became an adult. It's not that clear. I slowly emerged. And we'll see that the next chapter is called Emerging Adulthood, because in the West, our practice of getting into adulthood is complicated. We slowly, gradually take on the responsibilities of adults, particularly right now in our society, that immediately moved out, got married, got a house, got all those things. That is not as common as went to college, moved back home, stayed there for about a year, tried it, moved in with my girlfriend, we broke up, had to get some roommates, my mom's still paying for my cell phone, that kind of nebulous sort of transition into adulthood. Someone is 20-something, sometimes 30-something, and they still have home connections that are happening. That's not necessarily the same as failure to launch. We'll get into that in the next chapter, but but it's related to that. It's a different experience of adulthood. It's not just one sort of thing. Now, what I covered in this stuff, the first one that I remember that was sort of related to this was confirmation. Growing up Catholic, this happened at age 13, as does many rituals for adulthood begin at the early teenage years. There was a time that truly was the entry into adulthood. If we think about rituals, when we think about love and falling, real love being a sort of, that's what happens when people become adults. They understand other than it's puppy love before that, or it's immature love before that. And we think of the most famous couple of all, Romeo and Juliet. Juliet was 13 and Romeo was 14. So when those were written, that wasn't comic. That was drama. And it was expected that individuals at 13 and 14 would be thinking about those things. However, truthfully, in that day and age, the 13-year-old girl was up for grabs, but the boy wasn't quite on his own yet. It was usually much older men with much younger women. And so part of the tragedy of their union in Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's famous tragedy, is that they could never get married. He wasn't old enough to marry her. She was young enough to get married. In fact, the tradition of the Sweet 16 is that was the age at which, if you weren't already married, we have to throw a party, and a coming out party, and make sure everybody knows that you're available because we got to get you out. At 16, we're running low on time. And so the Sweet 16 came out. In fact, just to throw the icing on cake, the true tragedy of Cinderella, the story of Cinderella, is not that she's not being let go to the bar. It's to the ball. It's that she's 16 and they're not letting her go to the ball. Now, the Disney kind of portrays her as a little bit older than that, but Cinderella is 16 years old. Her prime is, she's going to end up a widow. She's going to end up, an old spinster if she doesn't get hooked up with Prince Charming. And the real evil of the stepmom is to take that 16-year-old and hide her away, and thus sentence her to a life of being alone and dependent on welfare, if not dying because nobody's there to take care of her. So in the past, these early ages, we see those in the ancient traditions. So in bat mitzvahs, bar mitzvahs, those kinds of things in the Jewish tradition, 13, 14 years old, confirmation, 13, 14 years old. This is these transitions into adulthood, or taking on, in this case, a spiritual adulthood, even though I'm not fully, of course, taking on an adult role, even in the church. Next in line was my driver's license. This was kind of a big deal in my community. I lived in northern Maine, and we all did this together as a class. It was actually a class we took in high school called driver's ed, and part of our regular curriculum. And Mr. Sear, still alive and still doing it, all these years later, taught me how to drive. And that was cool. It was very important. Here's a picture of the first family car called the Brown Hornet. That's not the actual one, but it's the same model. And so that independence, though, getting my driver's license was a big deal. I could drive around now, and I had a degree of independence from my family. Of course, I wasn't working, really not full time. I wasn't buying all the groceries nor paying all the bills. So I had my license, so I was kind of like an adult, but I wasn't fully an adult. The next one that comes along is my 18th birthday. My 18th birthday, I legally became an adult. And I make the joke here that we could cross into Canada, however, and I could drink. I couldn't drink, it was age 20 at that time in Maine, but in Canada, it was 18, and that was a mere, 5-6 miles from where I lived. So now that I had a car, I could go to Canada and legally drink at 18. And then high school graduation, probably an important event for all of us, and certainly all the speeches and the gowns and all that, and all the talk that's going on. It's an entry into adulthood. You're leaving high school, going off to college or going off to work. And for many of the students that I graduated with in high school, they got jobs locally, either at the mill or doing farm work or whatnot, and met up with their partners and started their families and built their house. And this truly was a launching point into adulthood. I, on the other hand, went to college and protracted my adolescence out for several years. So college was not necessarily the most adult thing I've ever done. Now, and I tell a little story here about my misunderstanding of what Project Graduation was about, but I'm going to blame Andrew for that. You'll understand when you read the textbook. College came along, and college is probably the most profound. For those first 4 years, I went out of state, new culture, new time, different majors, wildlife, but then not too wild. I don't have those wild, like my older brother has a lot of wild stories from college. I wasn't nearly as wild, but experimented with all aspects of becoming an adult. And but still really didn't feel like it. So I graduated from college, and it was like, yeah, okay, you got a bachelor's degree. And I was playing in a band at the time, and I had this sort of fantasy that I could become world famous of that. So I decided to go to music school. I am totally happy I did, and it was a great decision, but at the time it was probably not that great of a decision. And so still playing with adulthood here. I'm not quite ready to go get the big job that I'm supposed to get, not ready to go to graduate school, certainly. That came a little later. And it wasn't until I got my first apartment. And it wasn't even the first apartment. It was the time that I got the phone book and looked up my number, and it was Mark Kavanaugh. It wasn't Barbara Kavanaugh. It wasn't my mom. It was me. I was in there. And that's the first time it kind of dawned on me. So I was out of college at this point and working, and this was my first sort of like, maybe that's what it is. Now, there's been lots of events since then. Going to graduate school, graduating from that, getting career-related jobs instead of just, the transitory jobs that I was in. Of course, having kids and getting married and, all that stuff, very, very significant aspects. I think one of these days I'll be in a nursing home and finally look in the mirror and say, I think I'm an adult now. And so things are not always clear for us, in terms of a clear delineation as to when we actually become adults. And so given that, I want to go into a kind of a deep discussion, and I do it in the course book, of this assignment that I have you. So I'm going to cut right to it. We're going to borrow from sociology 2 terms, and it's status and role. Now, our status is the job title that we have relative to a social group that we belong into. So I'm in a family, and I have many job titles. I am dad, I'm husband, I'm brother, I'm cousin, I'm uncle, I'm nephew. I mean, it goes on. Each one of those statuses has a to-do list that we call roles, or the job description. So the job title is dad. What's the role? What do dads do? They provide, they take care of, they teach, those kinds of things, all the lists. What does it mean to be a good dad? Now, society has very clear definitions of some of these. It's pretty clear what we want from a dad, pretty clear when it doesn't happen, pretty clear what we want with a mom, what does a brother do, what does a sister do, all those things. We have these statuses in our family, and we also have them to other groups we belong to. You belong to this class, so you are a student, but you're also a citizen of Maine, and you might also be a father or a mother. You might also be a sister or brother, and you might be the president of your local snowmobile club. Each one of those things has a status and role. So when we talk about, when in sociology we go into things like role conflict and role strain, it's when you have too many statuses and too many roles. You have conflicting roles. Like, I'm not sure if I can get my homework for my adult psychology class done and also put together my presentation for the next snowmobile club meeting. I'm having a hard time balancing those 2 things. That's what we call role strain. And role conflict is when it's one or the other. You're a parent and you have that snowmobile meeting that you're going to. Your kid has soccer practice. Well, it wouldn't be soccer practice. They have hockey practice. And you have a meeting that same night, and you have to decide which one you're going to go to. That's called the role conflict. Now, role stress and role conflict are the primary sources of stress that we have. So understanding that these are actually conflicts within the job descriptions of the various roles we have makes it clear where the solution to our stress is. Quit some of those jobs and don't quit the parent one. Quit the snowmobile club one while manage that. Manage how many statuses do you want to take on. Anyway, that's a little aside. We're going to look at a very large level. In your family, in the umbrella of your culture that you're living in right now, when you think of an adult, when you look at that, I'm going to use psychology, when you're going to get the schema in your head, the internal representation, when you think adult, and it's the generic, no-name brand adult, and you say, okay, what do adults do? What does it mean to be an adult? And I want you to list 15 things. And I gave one example. I'm not going to go any further than that. They pay their bills on time. Adults do that. People who don't pay their bills on time, they're not adults. That kind of, it's a value system. So you come up with 15 of those, 15 things that you think in your family, that you don't have to be doing all of them because you don't have to be 100% adult. We're going to find out. But I want you to put the true blue in your family, in your culture. What do you think are the 15 things that adults do? Then I've created discussion boards. It's actually the assignment, but we're going to play it out in the discussion boards. You've been paired up with another individual who is going to be doing the same thing from their cultural perspective. You're not going to talk about it. You're going to do your own independent list of 15, and you're going to give each one of those 15 things a Likert rating scale of 1 to 5, with 5 meaning I always do this, 4 meaning I often do this, 3 meaning I usually, or about half the time, 2 is I rarely do this, and 1 is I never do this. So you have that list and that rating scale, and you are going to, that's your, let's pretend that you're hiring an adult in your life to take care of all your adult things. Wouldn't that be cool? And you want someone who's going to be a really good adult. So these are all the things they need to be good at, so you don't have to do them. And so you hire this individual. What are you going to look for? What qualifications are you going to look for? Now, what you're going to do with that is you're going to post that document as a PDF into your respective discussion board. Your partner is going to post theirs. Then you are going to take yours and theirs, and you're going to complete it rating yourself. How well am I doing as an adult based on my standards, and how well am I doing as an adult based on my partner's standards? So you should have 2 different ratings, and there's a little bit of math in there to determine, what's your score on a 0 or 100. Are you 80% adult, 60% adult, 70% adult? In the time frame of your behavior in the last 6 months. How well have you done as an adult? You then will go in and post into the discussion board a summary of your results, what it means, and then, only then, begin to engage with the other person with the dialogue. And I want to see a back and forth between each one of you about differences in what they perceive as being an adult. How did my score reflect on yours? Or get a dialogue going about your different perspectives on adulthood. So you're going to be learning from each other at least 2 different perspectives. There might be a tremendous amount of overlap. We're not that different, demographically in this group, but certainly different enough that there's going to be some things in there that when I've done this, there have been certain things that I've seen come up in people's lists that is very specific to their particular experience of becoming an adult. And it might not be the thing that happened in your life that made adulthood real. And so I described that assignment both in the context of the teaching section in the class, and then of course in the assessment section I go into the detail about how to do that. Just so review all of that. The discussion itself is the graded discussion part is actually, like Chapter 3 discussion is discussing rites of passage that you've had, similar to the example I did with confirmation and my license and graduating from high school and stuff. You don't have to be that comprehensive, but share some of those ideas with you. Now, I want to make it clear, all of this is occurring in the context of discussions. So you're participating in there, but one of them is actually an assignment. And that's the Chapter 3 assignment, but you're going to be doing all the work for that assignment within a discussion board with your partner. All it is, if we were in a face-to-face classroom, I'd pair you up and you would go and do that work. That's what I'm replicating. Now, what I'm hoping is that when you go into Chapter 3, the Chapter 3 folder, that you actually see only your discussion board. I'm going to show you what I see. Because I'm the teacher, I see all of them, all these groups. There's 10 groups in all. There's 2 people in each group, and I see them all. I'm hoping you only see the one that you're part of. If that's not the case, then I need to send a list out as to who's in what group, and you would only go into that group. So I can't really see what you see in that way, so you're going to have to help me out if this is not quite working out the way I want it to. So we're looking at transitions into adulthood. Look at from a global perspective. There are lots of rites of passage into adulthood. How do we know that we become an adult is the other part of our discussion. What does it mean to be an adult? What is the difference between when we were a kid and when we were an adult? What does that mean to me? And then again, as we're approaching the week after this, and we're going to talk about emerging adult and this practice of gradually taking on adulthood, it would not be surprised if there was very few people in this class who really cranked out the adulthood in the last 6 months and just were, 100% adult. And, many of us, for one thing, we're not that consistent, and we're adults anyway, and that's fair. But some of us are simply in situations, even though we have a lot of adult things going on, not everything on that list is there. And for somebody who might think that part of the list that you didn't do or are not doing is important, they would disqualify you for that job of adulthood. If paying your own bills, if you didn't, let's say you did everything else, but you're not paying your own bills, and somebody wants to hire you to pay their bills, they might say, well, you don't have any idea about how to pay bills, so I'm not going to hire you in this play that we're doing in this assignment. But nonetheless, that's what's expected this week. We have a discussion, and then we have all those individual discussion assignments, chapter 3 assignment, where you're pairing up and doing the sharing of the adult status role job descriptions and the rating scales. So please make sure you read all this stuff really thoroughly. It's really not that complex of a chapter, just kind of looking at these things, and the assignments are pretty simple here. So if there's any questions, please post them in the question discussion board, or reach out, and have a great week. And hopefully many of you will be celebrating right now as I'm recording this. I'm going to be signing off, and I'm going to get ready to watch the Super Bowl, and hopefully your favorite team wins. I won't tell you who mine is. Have a great week.